it's going to cost about 200 million quid. Probably cost more than that, I would have thought. And they see it as a sort of successor to the Royal Yacht Britannia. Now, Boris wanted to call the ship, HMS Prince Philip, or whatever you call that kind of a boat. He wanted to name it after Philip. And the Queen said no. I wonder why. It's extraordinary, isn't it? The Queen said, no, you can't name that boat after my husband, my late husband. So we'll be discussing that strange turn of events with royal expert and biographer Angela Levin in just a little while. But first, I want to talk about Playgroup meditation sessions. Very, very important part of work if you work in a prison, apparently. This will teach prison wardens and prison staff all about diversity and intersectionality and white privilege. Why do they need to do this? They're just locking up crooks. Just keep the keys, lock the door. That's all you need to do. You don't need to do anything else. It seems extraordinary. Let's speak to the General Chair of the Prisoner Office Association, Mark Fairhurst. Hello, Mark.
Hi, Kevin.
What's your feeling about this? It's very strange, isn't it? We don't need this kind of ridiculous wokery in prisons.
Well, I didn't know nothing about it until I read the article this morning, and I just reiterate the words of our Secretary of State, Robert Buckland, and totally agree with him. People at the top need to get a grip. This is a waste of effort, a waste of time, and a waste of money. We don't need it, and we need to get our priorities right.
Yeah, and don't forget this will cost the taxpayer money, so it strikes me that's a massive waste of our money, and I think it's a waste of your members, the prison staff's time as well, isn't it?
Well, we have other priorities at the moment. If we're going to put on training sessions, then we need to get back in date on our use of force training. We need to care for those who most need us, and get those rehabilitation programs for prisoners back on track as we gradually start to open up after the pandemic. So this is a nonsense. It's not needed, and it's a complete waste of taxpayers' money.
But it just plays into what so many organisations and companies are doing now. It's virtue signalling nonsense. It's aren't we wonderful? We're teaching our staff about the horrors of racism. And I'm sure that your members, Mark, aren't racists anyway. So why do they need this kind of teaching?
Well, we don't need it at all. We have more than adequate training programs in place for diversity and equality. We are a very diverse workforce anyway, and we, of course, have a very diverse prison population. But this is just an example of the sort of nonsense that is starting to drift into the service. Things like calling prisoners men and residents service users, locking them in rooms and not cells. It's an absolute nonsense. How can you class anybody other than a prisoner when they are incarcerated by the state against their will? They're either a remand prisoner or a convicted prisoner. Prisoner is not a dirty word. And this is just yet another example of the absolute nonsense that we don't need.
So in these meditation sessions, these playgroup meditation sessions, they're called Walk in the Park. And so your members, the prison and probation staff, are asked to close their eyes and imagine they're walking through a park where they encounter different people. That's a really excellent way for your members and your colleagues to spend their working day, isn't it?
Well, as I say, we've got our priorities. The priorities at the moment are to keep the most vulnerable and violent people in society safe from the pandemic, safe from each other by reducing violence. Let's get some investment in our prisons so there are decent living conditions for prisoners and decent working conditions for staff. And let's make sure that when we release people, they have hope. We give them work skills that they can use in society to get employment. And when they are released, let's make sure they're not sleeping rough on the streets. So if you want to look after staff, then I would much rather you look after the mental health of staff and have trained psychologists or therapists or counsellors on site for staff to walk off the landings and access at any time of the day during their shifts. That's how you help staff. We don't need any of this drivel in our service. And what does it look like to the public, Kevin? Yeah. This is about public confidence. And for once, I just think these people need to think about the victims of crime, how it looks to victims of crime.
Yeah, the Justice Secretary, Robert Buckland, is furious about it. He has told the prison service to get a grip. We really don't need this kind of wokery in the prison service. I mean, what these ludicrous playgroup meditation walk in the park sessions are designed to teach your colleagues and members, Mark, is the horrors of white privilege. This system by which you might not think you're a racist, but you are because you're the beneficiary of white privilege. Now, this is to help your colleagues deal with prisoners, right? So I would suggest that prisoners who are white, are not exactly the beneficiaries of white privilege, are they? It's not very privileged to be locked in a cell.
No, you're quite right. These are the most damaged people in society who need our help and understanding. We need to try our best to reform them so they don't commit crime and lead law-abiding lives upon their release. And that's what we're trying to do. We are a working class workforce. There is no privileged staff in our service. We are from the communities that prisoners come from. So we serve the public by keeping in custody those committed by the courts. And our sole aim is to help them lead law-abiding lives. This is unnecessary. It's not needed. It's not even an issue in our prisons. We're doing pretty well, thank you very much, with a diverse workforce and the way we treat people with decency and humanity. We don't need this.
What, Mark, moving on, if you like, what are the most urgent things that the prison service needs right now? I mean, better working conditions, better pay packets, because there is a sort of staff shortage problem, isn't there?
Yeah, as quick as we recruit, we can't retain staff. The attrition rate is quite high in some jails. Annually, it's looking at about 10%, and over 50% of staff leave within the first 2 years of service because the pay structures are just not fit for the job that you do. So they're leaving to join the border force, the police, the railways. They're even leaving to work in supermarkets because the pay in some areas is better than you would get as a prison officer. So we need to look at pay structures, but without safety and security, we can't even begin to reform people. So our priorities are, let's get our prisons safe again. Let's make sure that those in our care are looked after with humanity and decency, that they're not feeling scared when they're unlocked. But let's give them purposeful and constructive work to do when they are unlocked. So when they leave, they have a work skill or they're educated to a standard that will help them get employment. They're the priorities.
Will you be asking for your colleagues and your members to be excused or not to have to do these playgroup meditation walk in the park sessions? Because, as you said earlier, Mark, I mean, not only does it beg a belief that they could think this would be any good at all, but also it projects a silly, woke image of a service that is neither silly nor woke.
Yeah, we are a frontline emergency service. We are a uniform service. It doesn't create the right impression. I'm in my 30th year as a prison officer, and if a manager came along to me and said, I want you to do this session, a walk in the park, I'd be telling them to stick it where the sun doesn't shine. So, I'd like to see them try and ask experienced staff to do this. It's absolutely ridiculous.
Couldn't agree with you more, Mark. Thank you so much for your time. Mark Fairhurst there, General Chair of the Prison Officer Association.